this is sort of a really important part of lean, the lean methodologies around doing user research. Because like I was saying, there's this instinct to say, I want to test this with boatloads of people. And you get those diminishing returns, and those returns diminish at different rates depending on your product, so, and who you've tested with in the first place. So if you get boatloads of good stuff from people 1, 2, and 3, and by the time you're getting to 4 and 5, you're like, I haven't really heard anything that's new. Then you talk to person number 6, and you're like, I'm still not hearing anything that's new. Then maybe you're good for the time being. You don't really have to go on and talk to another 5, 6, 7 people. So if you're comparing your results after each person, even just for 30 seconds, saying, did I learn a lot of new stuff here? Am I still making progress? Then you can determine, when is enough, and when you're ready to get back to work and just start revising your product based on what you heard. So, and we did talk a little bit about adjusting your script. Feel free to do that, though not too much. You still want your results to have some meaning when you compare them later on, and you want them to be reasonably consistent, but don't test the same broken thing when you know it's broken 6 times. In the end, you want to not only look at what you got wrong. That's going to be the most glaringly present stuff in the analysis that you do. What did we screw up on? But you also want to look at what you got right and think about what the successes were and how you could bring some of those concepts that you really did get right into other areas of your product that might not be quite as strong. And I think my final point would be to say that user testing is just one data point. It's not something that directly in and of itself confirms whether or not you have a good product or confirms that you have a crappy design. It's a way of prompting questions and not actually delivering the answers. So don't say in either direction, oh, well, these 4 users couldn't use it, so it's terrible and we completely have to do it over. Or vice versa, don't assume that because 5 people liked it that you've got a winner on your hands, especially if those 5 people are like the people in this room that are hesitant to tell you the bad stuff. So that's my half, and Ryan's going to dig a little bit into the nitty-gritty there. So
thank you. So I'm going to show you the tools and techniques that you can use to essentially conduct user testing. Excellent. So the tools and techniques for all the teams are going to be a little different because everyone's at different stages. And one thing that happens with usability studies is I think a lot of teams do it too late in the process. And I think usability studies can be done at any time, and I'm going to show you how. The first thing to understand, though, is just I have a few quotes to go, is that you're here to understand the frustration in your interface, right? When you put this together, it really isn't a beauty pageant. It isn't about your design. It isn't about how pretty the colors are. It's about where the frustrations lie, because when you identify those, you actually can solve for them, right, in your design and in your product. I like to always say, do it rough and do it early, because the earlier you do it, you have more time to actually act upon it, because if you do it too late, in reality, it isn't called usability testing anymore. It's called validation. Like at Microsoft, that was in some teams, not all teams. If you do it too late in the process, it's too late to change things. And at that point, you just know what you've done wrong and you can't do anything about it. So try to do it as soon as possible. If you guys can get ready by next Friday. How many teams signed up for?
It was like 8.
Okay, so a lot of teams. I'd say by 2. And so, never mind. I don't have to say encourage. Do it. So let's talk about heuristic evaluations first. That's the part that Jackson actually spent most of his time on, which is essentially creating tasks and testing it out on your actual product. And the point here is to understand the usability problems in your design and find where the frustrations are. There are many ways to do it, from lo-fi using paper samples, all the way to medium using PowerPoint and Keynote, all the way to your actual final product, which is like coded prototypes in the live version. Be comfortable that you can actually learn something from each of these different stages. If you're like for us in Pipette, we have some nice designs, but we may actually start this next week using paper prototypes, just because it's going to be easier for us to understand and easier for us to convey and learn things from. So lo-fi tools, paper and pencil. It can be nice and fancy like this, all the way to little sketches and scribbles. But one thing to think about here is when you create this on paper, you're going to have to almost create every single screen that your user needs to see. I think it's called Wizard of Oz. Is it called Wizard of Oz? Or what's the one where you show it, you almost pretend the UI? Yeah. Wizard of Oz. Okay, yeah. So essentially you'll put a screen out in front of someone, and they'll tap a button, and you have all the other pieces of paper, and you'll be flipping them out. and you essentially can simulate an interface. And so for the example here where this might work well, like the BrainBot team, right? For them, let's say they don't have their full technology done, they could simulate it using pieces of paper. Like this is what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to convey magical things at each and every screen. So lo-fi is good. Medium fidelity is not bad either, and that's hopping into PowerPoint or Keynote and using a lot of these templating to put things together. And what you can do with PowerPoint and Keynote is you can create a bunch of screens just like the pieces of paper, and you can start clicking forward and backwards through them, right? So we're getting a little more richer with the interactions. There are a bunch of free templates online if you're doing mobile development, which you can download. There's a bunch of free templates online if you're doing web development. And so this is a pretty good route. I like using PowerPoint and Keynote a lot because what it means is I can put together my wireframes and send them out to the rest of my team, and they can edit them, right? Like being able to translate these across helps. And so paper you really can't, but in PowerPoint or Keynote.
It's not terribly tough when you're using one of these tools or even if you're using OmniGraffle or something like that to actually wire them up so it feels a little more prototypey and not quite as linear as just going from slide to slide and saying when you click on this button you'll go to slide 36 and make it vaguely feel like something's actually happening there. So. And
one thing that we like to do is like you can criticize a design that looks like this in wireframes significantly easier than when it's a full-fledged design, because sometimes when you see a beautiful design, it looks like it's almost done. It looks like everything's finished and polished, and you feel bad for critiquing it. Here you can say, you know what, can't you move this whole patient thing down here? Can't you move your navigation over there? And you feel more comfortable discussing something like this. If you have some more time, you can actually use one of these tools like Balsamiq, Go, Mockingbird, or Flare Builder. And what it'll let you do is let you toss together just like a PowerPoint or a Keynote, but you can actually add interactivity to it. Balsamiq looks like this. It actually looks like a cartoon on purpose, right? So you're supposed to just get the idea of how the interface works. Flare Builder looks maybe a little more like a UI, like actually how a UI would look like, and you actually can create fields that you can type into and make it react accordingly. So these are good tools to use if you don't have functioning code. The last one is hi-fi, right? So like the Skimble team, they can actually take their current working product and do usability testing on it. And so for them, they're kind of in a different stage where they actually can use something that works and all the bells and whistles are there. And this is what we would do actually at Microsoft or Outlook. Like near the end of the project, it was all working, and we would just keep iterating on what we learned from our functioning design. So this is high fidelity. So in all this, no matter what you're using, whether it's lo-fi, medium-fi, or hi-fi, like Jackson said, you're going to have to take notes on all this, right? And taking notes on paper is kind of difficult, so there are a bunch of cool tools out there that'll help you. So recording tools like Silverback is a really nifty tool where you just load it on your Mac. You can create a whole set of tasks, and you can hit pretty much record, and it'll record the user's face on your iMac or your Mac, and it'll record what's on the screen, and then it'll create this little composite video at the end. So you can actually watch the person talking and how they're using your app on the screen.
And like when they click on something, you'll see this little blowing up circle that says here was a click, and you can see what they're typing and so on.
Because in reality, you're not going to remember every single little piece that happens there. And plus, sometimes it's good to be able to convey frustration to the rest of your team. And if you have a video of someone sitting there and can't figure out how to add, let's say, a new pipette, and Jimmy doesn't trust me, and I'm like, well, Jimmy, take a look at the video. And it's like, oh, yeah, okay. So video is a really good way to convey. Another tool you can use, this is more for websites more than anything, but like A/B testing. So as you go through a set of participants, you may want to basically vary what they see, and so tools like Optimizely let you do that.
The founder is speaking next week.
That's true. So they're speaking next week, and I think they'll actually show you how to do usability testing with A/B testing is almost doing usability testing on your live audience, right? Like because you're basically changing your live site, and people are coming and hitting it, and you're adjusting it on the fly, and basically it picks the design that wins on the fly.
Yeah, the thing that makes usability testing different from A/B testing and split testing is that in usability testing you can start to figure out what the why is behind why somebody did something on your product, whereas in these cases you'll see that 84% of people did X and the rest did Y, and you're not really sure why that happened. You can't really get much rationale behind it. So.
Yeah. And when you have especially when you have a user there, they'll probably say why they're clicking on something too. This is a tool you can toss in while you're doing a usability study, as well as like for a live site, it's something called Crazy Egg, which has has click tracking. There's a bunch of tools out there, and I think even for mobile stuff as well. I believe Flurry does a little bit of this too, where you can actually get heat maps of where people are clicking. You can get scroll maps of where people are scrolling up and down on your page, and it really shows you where your audience is looking and clicking, which is useful. And if you want to go all the way out there, there's like a testing suite called Verify, which you actually can drop onto your site, do live tests. This gets kind of pricey and expensive, so this is kind of on the edge of what you can do. So I'm actually going to jump into this part where it's I don't have time. Is there anything simpler I can do? Because there's going to be some teams next week which may not have functioning prototypes. And so here are a few activities that you can do to learn something at a usability fair. The first one's called card sorting. The example here I was going to use is actually for Omada Health. So Omada Health has a lot of content, a lot of different sections, a lot of different aspects to their product, and maybe they don't exactly know how it's supposed to be organized. And so what they would do is they'd use card sorting. What it is, you take a bunch of index cards, you create all the different sections or different pieces of your site or of your content, and you give them to your user, and you basically ask them to arrange them in the most logical order. And then after they do that, you ask them to create another index card which labels them, right? And from this, after you go through 5 or 6 people, you're going to see how they organize and look at your content, your site. The important thing about card sorting, though, is that you need to make sure the people that are doing it is your audience. Because a person like me, I'm may not be the perfect. You just have to make sure your audience for this one is important. That's maybe the best way to say it. Because you want someone who lives and breathes the space that you're kind of target to create these groups for you. So really cheap index cards, Post-its, and Sharpies, and it can be done within 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes. The next one is called visual affordances or link affordances. I like this one a lot because what you do is you basically take your site or your app, you print it out in grayscale, and you give it to your usability participant, and you tell them to highlight where they can click. So essentially what they do is you give them only 2 minutes to do it or 30 seconds to do it, and they'll go and highlight all the things that they think they can click on. And what that teaches you and what shows you essentially what they perceive that as part of the interface. And for example here, your users may never know that you actually can click on any of these pieces. And so it's kind of one of those things that just kind of guide your design. Another example of this one too is we have reports in Pipette. What we were planning on doing is actually printing out a set of reports and giving them to doctors. And what they'll do is mark the areas they like and mark the areas they think they're confusing. So it's a very low-tech way to get feedback.
Why grayscale?
Grayscale, it's I think a way to just kind of I can't decide if it was either because that was the cheapest way to do it for the longest time, or because when you take color out of the picture, it is the elements that are meant to be clickable stand out.
Yeah, and there are a couple reasons why you might do it that way. Another is just that if you're dealing with men, 20% of men have some form of color blindness, and at least that your color choices aren't going to impact the usability of your site if they're able to just determine without any color that they can click on stuff. And there's another similar kind of method where you'll ask somebody to squint at the screen and basically give you their impression of what part of the screen is the most important part.
Yeah.
And so by lowering the fidelity in sometimes arbitrary way, you can get different kinds of feedback than you would with a full color one.
Because in this world right here, if it's for a website, you're going to see people highlight all the underlying things first. Then they'll go after the buttons, and you're going to realize half your UI that you actually think is clickable because you have color and you have gradients to it, the average person isn't going to see it. So visual affordance is good, very cheap, very easy. Anyone can do it from on a wireframe to a hi-fi version of it. This is kind of like the squint test. It's the 5-second test. There's 2 ways to do this. Essentially what it is you show your UI for 5 seconds to a user, and then you ask them questions. It's really cool because you can essentially ask them everything from what brand element stood out the most to you, what do you think this site is about, or to more pointed things, where should you be clicking to do a certain action. And so the reverse is almost asking them the question first and then showing them the UI and seeing if they can get to it. And so there are a few sites out there, Clue and 5-second test, which can help you. And actually both of them are free, so this is a free, easy test that you can run. So I kind of ran through a bunch of different ways you can do usability testing. I think the most common ones are the heuristic evaluations where you're taking people through tasks using your product. These other ones are different ways you can gather information from real users in person. But the thing